Vamos vai terceiro, terceiro. Tava kan shumikisa. Tava ngene rekombekiseni. Okay, here we go. Nasungula. Select on. I'm not going to waste time, guys. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10. Woo!
As we hurtle towards collision at Survivor Series, we must first find out who holds the advantage at War Games as Cody Rhodes faces off against Braun Breaker to earn that all-important upper hand. Between Survivor Series, last time tournament, and everything in between, there has been nothing but chaos across the red and blue brands. But I'm Megan Rubin, and I'll be right back here next week to keep you up to speed on all the excitement this week on WWE.
Cheese. She got stamina from cheese. And to high, she got healthy bones from
cheese. It's obviously cheese.
Dairy gives you more blood than you know. Welcome back to the show. Lando Norris versus Oscar Piastri. Side by side, cars collide. Impressive from Hadjar this season. Kimi Antonelli, the youngest pole sitter in Formula One history. It's an uphill battle for Max now. Who knows what the second half will bring? What an amazing spectacle.
The 2025 Formula One season on Supersport, proudly brought to you by Discovery.
anything is possible with Max.
The vegetables they were eat. So they, in their mind, back mind, they thought maybe if we can create a tractor that can walk and grow the plant in the garden, then we can have more vegetables for our schools.
For Africa and the global south, the stakes are high. Digital public infrastructure and fair artificial intelligence are not luxuries, but lifelines for inclusive growth.
In the past, some of us were not exposed to technology, computers, met them for the first time at university or so, but now, as young as 5-6 years, we are already exposing our learners to this, and this put them at a better position to compete even at global level. We can see future scientists, future IT specialists from the exposure that we are giving our children.
The challenge for work leaders now is whether they will ensure a digital future that connects us all or risk leaving millions further behind. For News from Africa on Channel 405, I'm Malungelo Boy in Johannesburg.
All right, let's take you now back to Nazareth. And this is where the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is expected to hold a press conference shortly. My colleague William Vogel is there. He joins us live now. Will, good evening to you. Do we know what the UN chief is likely to communicate this afternoon?
Well, not yet. Certainly from the communique the United Nations sent yesterday, they said we will know, and once he actually speaks, and they will circulate the speech afterwards. That's the closest they've actually gotten to telling us what he is going to say. But of course, ahead of the summit, he has expressed his worry. Of course, he has to be as diplomatic as a U.S. Secretary General can possibly be, but he was worried that especially the country that's going to take over the presidency of the G20 is behaving the way they have been behaving. He has the closest, I think, the Secretary General of the UN has said is that he is worried that things or the agenda shouldn't really take the G20 back because he feels a lot of progress has been made over the years around issues of climate change, also around debt financing for developing a country. So he is particularly worried about those issues. He did express his view that he hopes that there will be no reversal at the very least of that particular agenda. Of course, it's a concern that South Africans also have, because if you listen to people, what they have been talking about, their agenda they believe should be advanced is an agenda that actually serves ordinary people, people on the ground, the most vulnerable of communities. Take a listen to what some people have said ahead of this summit, as they were asked by our journalists across the board what their expectations were, what they're hoping for at this particular conference.
I don't think ikhona into ezotshintsha mina. If ever singakhuluma ngendaba ukuthi khona into ezotshintsha ne, if babe implemente early from 1994 onward, maybe bekuzoba khona change. But manje njengoba sikhuluma nje, yabona kuwesi kakhulu manje, mina angiboni next. Nakhona azoshaye futhi ngabilo kungane tax because ama-tariffs wakhe angithi wakhuphulile manje ne, njengoba khuphulile ama-tariffs wakhe kusho ukuthi kuzophinde kube nzima still.
I-G20 izokwenza lokhu ezokwenza, but then abantu abasafalayo abantu abaku-ground. The most people abasebenzi la South Africa, i-black tax imenzani njengawe nje, ikwenzani i-black tax? Kuyondliwa emakhaya, abantwana bazobuyela esikoleni, idorobha lingcolile. So yini different ezokwenza ezofika ne-G20? those few days nje bese iyahamba. I don't think izokwenza i-difference. If ibizokwenza i-difference, akubonakale ngabantu abaningi beqashwa bethola umsebenzi. Kubonakale ngakuthi abantu bangaphandle uma bengena eSouth Africa bengene ngamaphilisi besebenze into right. Ubugebengu buhigh, i-G20 izoyenza.
Ngiyacabanga ukuthi uzoletha umehluko because as much as bavumelene ukuthi bahlangane babonisane kakhulukazi ngezomnotho wamazwe wonke, ngicabanga ukuthi izoletha intuthuko izoletha i-difference. Going forward, I think the positive will come out.
The host country, of course, does have its own expectations in line with the themes that South Africa has actually chosen for this particular G20 issues of equality, sustainability. And the Minister of Electricity was talking earlier about the just transition, what South Africa is hoping for a leveling of a playing field. Dr. Hosienzo Ramhopa talking about what they are expecting, what they will be pushing as, of course, leaders arrive to consider the draft declaration told that they must consider, and just transition is, of course, a big part of what South Africa hopes progress will be made around. Take a listen to what Dr. Ramhopa had to say around that particular matter.
If you look at the numbers, there's 600 million people who don't have access to electricity. Mission 300, a combination of philanthropy and governments on the continent have committed that we want to have that by 2030. Get 300 million access to electricity. And of course, we have that Africa has got renewable energy resources. I mean, we are unmatched. I think 60% of solar irradiation can be derived out of the continent, and yet the level of investment in renewables, especially solar, is just 1% of the total value of what has been invested across the globe. So it's important that we must concentrate our efforts to ensure that Africa, that has got huge renewable energy endowment, and also the biggest gap with regards to electricity access, is the one that is front center of our initiative. And that's why this collaboration here is meant to do that.
Of course, the UN Secretary would be worried about peace in the world. Of course, I mean, we know what is happening, continues to happen in the Ukraine. We've seen what has been happening in Sudan. We know what is happening in the Middle East. Those are issues that he has expressed concern about, and he hopes that the leaders who will be gathering here tomorrow and the day after will look at those issues as well, because without peace, really, the world cannot sit comfortably or sit in rooms and smile with each other and talk the beautiful language that forums like these are known for. And yet, in certain corners of the world, people are living or are in war situations. That is the message he actually sent to foreign ministers a couple of months ago when they sat and looked at the G20 agenda. So we will, of course, hear what it is exactly that is topmost or foremost in his mind when he gets to address the media briefing on that stage. You can see journalists are beginning to gather. It's only a few minutes before that briefing actually starts. So we will indeed hear from what the UN Secretary General has to say this time around. And on the back of that problem, which he too did expressed his worry about, which is the tendency of the United States in particular to not really pull as much as on these issues as most countries tend to. How open he will actually be on that, on the back of what he has said.
Hello, guys.
Consensus
You're welcome.
expressed previously, of course, is what we will hear in a few minutes' time.
I'm reluctant to let you go because, as you say, it's only a matter of time before the UN chief does address at that media briefing. But we know that just a few hours ago, he was at the COP30 conference in Brazil. And there, the understanding is that he lamented that 10 years after that landmark Paris climate conference, little has been achieved. Communities still bearing the brunt of extreme weather conditions. We know, Vuyo, that a number of developed countries did make pledges to poorer countries that they are going to help finance this climate transition. Those talks, is there going to be any shift, at least from what we have heard of people's expectations coming out of this G20 summit?
Indeed, I mean, you will have seen scenes from that conference in Brazil, where indigenous communities feel that not much, if any, progress has been made over the past 10 years, especially given, of course, the pledges and the commitments that were made. And they made quite a statement in Brazil. You would have seen those, people will have seen those scenes of them storming that conference, really agitating for change, very concrete change. And there's an opportunity here, especially given the theme, because sustainability is part of South Africa's theme, and South Africa really pushing for that change. And I mean, from what the Shepherds said at over the weekend after Sunday, progress is being made. People are talking the language, keen to make the commitments, but the problem, or there is a lack of real, actual, concrete action, and that is what is holding things back, which they say shouldn't be underestimated or undermined, because previously there's been a reluctance to even, talk the kind of language that is being talked. But of course, talk is cheap, as people say. At the end of the day, talk has to be followed by a concrete action. Hopefully, that is what this particular summit will achieve. But then again, considering what the United States in particular has been saying over the year, and especially over the past few days, where they say that they're going to reset the button. They're going to take the G20 to what it was originally meant to do. And if you read between the lines, they don't like as is often the woke language of the world today. So reset a la United States, which is going to be the next president of the G20, is actually worrying to many people. To what extent the UN Secretary General in particular is worried about that is, of course, what we will hopefully hear in the next few minutes.
All right, Vimvogo, let's give you a short breather. Hopefully, when we come to you, we will be taking you straight to Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. In the meantime, let's bring you this. Deputy President Paul Mashatile will host French President Emmanuel Macron for a ceremony honoring French citizens who played a role in the fight against
Thank you for the lights.
Macron touched down in South Africa a short while ago. This is ahead of the G20 summit. France was among the countries that openly opposed apartheid and backed international efforts to isolate the apartheid regime. The wreath-laying ceremony will take place at
Freedom Park Heritage Site in Pretoria, and that's where we find Asian Africa reporter Veronica Mahwane.
Thank you for the
Veronica, good evening
likes.
to you, and thank you for
Thank you
this
very
particular
much.
update. Do we know where plans are right now? How far is the French president? We saw him touch down a few moments ago at OR Tambo International.
Well, Chloe, I can tell you, of course, as you've mentioned, that French President Emmanuel Macron has officially landed in South Africa. But before he can get into any of those G20 engagements that are expected to kick off from as early as today, the first stop he will make, and it really is quite a significant stop, is here at the Freedom Park Heritage Site. Behind me, as you can see, is the setup, essentially, for what is going to take place today. Those two flags, South African and French flags, standing together, a very symbolic moment and a very symbolic place where we are, because this essentially behind us is, of course, the wall of names. The bricks that you see there are essentially the names of women and men who over the years stood and fought for humanity, who fought for dignity, and who fought for freedom. And so the president will essentially be in.
Allow me to interrupt you, and we are going to take you to Nazareth now. I apologize to my colleagues sincerely for cutting her off. The UN Secretary General has taken the stage at Nazareth. Let's listen.
Ladies and gentlemen of the media, I thank President Ramaphosa and the people of South Africa for their warm welcome and for hosting the G20 summit. My message to G20 leaders over the next 2 days is simple. Now is the time for leadership and vision. We are living through tumultuous times, conflicts, climate chaos, economic uncertainty, mounting debt, inequality, and the collapse in global aid are inflicting massive suffering around the world. And rising military expenditure is drawing resources away from development. As the world's largest economies, the G20 can hold enormous influence to ease suffering, ensure that economic growth is widely shared, and set out our world on a better, more peaceful course for the future. The theme of this year's meeting, Solidarity, Equality and Sustainability, points the way.
Thank you very much.
Over the next 2 days, I will call on G20 members to use their leverage.
Hello.
We need.
How are you?
First, we need economic action. Developing countries, particularly in Africa, are suffering from a
Thank you for the likes.
of shrinking fiscal space,
Thank you for joining.
crashing debt burdens, and the global
Can
financial
you please subscribe
architecture
to my channel?
that is failing to support or even represent them adequately. Africa has been a double victim of colonialism. First, through centuries of exploitation and plunder, and then again, when international institutions were created, when most countries, African countries, were still under colonial rule, and their voices were absent from the table. Today, Africa remains woefully underrepresented across global institutions, and this must change. The Pact for the Future, adopted by member states last year, called for a reform of global financial institutions. Many decisions are disproportionately in the hands of some of the members of the G20 across the governance bodies of these institutions. Africa must have a fair seat in every forum where decisions are made, from the board of international financial institutions to permanent seats in the United Nations Security Council and to other global bodies. And the G20 can help repair this historic injustice and drive reforms that give developing countries and Africa in particular a real voice in shaping global policies and make global economic governance more inclusive, representative, equitable, and effective in the years ahead. I will also urge G20 members to live up to the commitments made in June in the Financing for Development conference in Sevilla to unlock more finance for developing countries, to triple the lending power of multilateral development banks, to increase their role in leveraging more private finance, to ease debt burdens with new instruments to reduce borrowing costs and risks, and speed up support for countries facing debt distress, drawing on recommendations from my debt expert group. To help developing countries strengthen their capacity to mobilize domestic resources and to build trade bridges, not trade barriers. Too many developing countries, especially in Africa, find themselves at the bottom of value chains or locked out of trade opportunities. G20 members can lead the way by dismantling trade barriers and ensuring trade-free access to their markets in the poorest countries. Meanwhile, inequality has become a cancer in our societies, concentrating power and eroding trust in democracy. I commend the G20 presidency for commissioning a bold report on global inequality. Second, we need climate action. The ongoing COP30 meeting demonstrates how much work needs to be done. Countries have failed to keep temperatures to 1.5-degree temperature rise limit. Science tells us that a temporary overshoot above this limit is now inevitable. And we must make this overshoot as small, short, and safe as possible. Avoiding more climate chaos means bridging
Thank
the
you for
adaptation
joining.
gap
Can you
urgently.
please
And that requires a
subscribe to my
massive
channel
scale-up of
and like the
financing.
life? And I
Developed
would really
countries
appreciate
must
that.
keep their promises by doubling adaptation finance to at least $40 billion this year, and giving confidence that meaningfully increased affordable and accessible adaptation finance will be scaled up beyond 2025. By mobilizing the 300 billion per year promised to developing countries by 2035, and by delivering on the Baku to Blame plan, mobilizing all relevant partners for the $1.3 trillion annually to be achieved in climate finance and in the same time framework for developing countries. Simultaneously, it's time to capitalize the loss and damage fund, including exploring possibilities of innovative finance. And we also need to supercharge the just transition to renewable energy. Last year, 90% of new power capacity came from renewables. Global investment in clean energy reached $2 trillion, 800 billion more than fossil fuels. But only a negligible proportion went to Africa. Africa should be at the heart of this clean energy revolution. The continent holds immense solar and wind potential, but lacks the investments needed to harness them. A just energy transition must also mean to entirely electrify Africa, powering homes, schools, clinics, and industries, and creating decent jobs for its young people.
This is the last one. Yo,
No one should be left in the dark by the clean energy age, least of all a continent that has contributed the least to the climate crisis. The economics are on our side, but political will needs to catch up. Fossil fuels still receive vast subsidies. Corporations are pocketing record profits from climate devastation, and lobbyists continue to greenwash the truth, while developing countries are locked out of a greener future. Ensuring that all countries can make this shift means aligning national policies and budgets with a just energy transition. And it means providing resources and technology to help developing countries invest in grids, storage, and efficiency. It means supporting workers and affected communities to make the transition through training, protection, and new opportunities. And it means unlocking finance at scale for developing countries
I love you guys.
Capital
Bye. See you
and
tomorrow.
growing in private investments. I will discuss these issues in detail with G20 leaders tomorrow.